Well, thank you. First of all, thank you to all of my great guests for being on this today and for bringing your expertise to this conversation. And thank you to all of you who have joined us for this really important call today. As we all know, last week, President Trump held a press conference in the Rose Garden to celebrate, and yeah, he did say celebrate, his new taxes on everyone. And I have to say, the alternative reality Trump and his advisors have been spinning could not be more different from what I am hearing from folks at home who had already been crushed by Trump's tariffs and are about to see their prices go up even more. So today I wanted to paint a better picture for all of us of what Trump's ham-fisted, utterly pointless tariffs are actually going to mean for people in Washington state, for businesses like Fulcrum Coffee Roasters in Seattle, for our farmers, for our fishers, for our growers, for housing developers who are going to face rising costs for the raw materials it takes to build, and that will ultimately raise the cost of housing for everyone. And for our families in every part of our state who are deeply worried about how Trump's tariffs are going to raise prices everywhere they shop. No matter how much Trump tries to deny the simple fact, tariffs are a tax that the American people will pay on everything they buy. There's a brand new analysis from the Yale Budget Lab that found that Trump's tariffs are going to cost the average family nearly $4,000 a year. That is the largest middle tax increase in a generation. Now, that extra tax might not matter much to billionaires like Trump and Elon Musk, who do not even shop for themselves or even think about basic necessities, but you can bet it is going to matter to regular people in Washington state. Families are going to feel the pain of Trump's new tariffs everywhere they shop. And as one of the most trade dependent states in the country, Washington state stands to lose among the most from Trump's destructive trade war. 2 in 5 jobs in our state exist because of international trade. That is a full 40% of jobs in our state. Farmers, fishers, producers in our state rely heavily on trade with Canada and with Mexico. And Trump's trade war has already been an especially deep cut for them. Now they are about to get hammered even more. Last year, Washington state imported $17.8 billion of goods from Canada alone. Everything from natural gas for folks to heat their homes, cars, seafood that you buy at the grocery store, fertilizer that our family farmers rely on. All of that now is getting more expensive because of Trump's tariffs. Canada is also our second largest export market, behind only China, which just got slapped with a 54% tariff they're promising to retaliate heavily against. Well, at least that was the plan last week. This week, it is 104%. Who knows what's next? I have talked to so many farmers in our state who are furious that Donald Trump cannot seem to grasp the basic fact that they actually rely on international markets. Last month, Trump posted on Truth Social, and I'm going to quote it, "Get ready to start making a lot of agricultural product to be sold inside of the United States. Have fun." Have fun? Many of our state's top commodities export up to 90% of their crops. Producers are panicking right now, and Trump doesn't seem to have a clue. He just slapped 24% tariffs on Japan, which is the largest export market for Washington potatoes. Now, potato growers are worried that they're going to lose access to Japan's market over retaliatory tariffs, and they already lost access to China's market in Trump's first term trade war. Our ports are concerned that countries will start bypassing U.S. ports altogether, offloading their goods in Vancouver, where it is cheaper. Business in northern Washington, especially Whatcom County, is already cratering from Trump's pointless trade war with Canada. The city of Blaine saw about a 40% drop in retail and services revenue after Trump's tariffs on Canada went into effect. As we know, the stock market is cratering right now and taking so many Americans' hard-earned retirement savings with it. Stocks fell 10% over the week, and they keep dropping. And what was Trump doing while the Dow Jones was plummeting and Americans were panicking? He was golfing. So it's already clear on Wall Street and Main Street alike that Trump's tariffs will be devastating, and it's also pretty clear he doesn't care. Trump and his advisors might try to pretend that someone else, some other country, is going to pay these taxes, but even they know that's not true. Does anyone remember how Trump said Mexico would pay for the border wall? He is selling snake oil. Trump actually admitted to NBC that he, quote, couldn't care less if automakers raised prices because of his tariffs. And the irony is rich, because at the very same time that Trump is slapping new taxes on the goods that middle-class families buy every day, at the very same time, Trump and Musk are insisting we cannot afford to fund like cancer research or keep Social Security staff to answer America's phone calls. Trump's top priority for Congress is making sure that Republicans move full steam ahead to pass massive new tax cuts for billionaires. And let's be clear, Republicans' tax breaks for billionaires are going to blow up the deficit they will not be paid for. But guess how Republicans are choosing to try and offset some of the costs of those tax cuts? By slashing Medicaid and nutrition programs that feed hungry kids and families. So to recap, Trump is gutting services and raising costs on you by thousands of dollars a year with his tariffs, while at the same time cutting taxes for himself and other billionaires like Elon Musk. That's the Republican plan. If you're a billionaire, you get showered with new tax breaks. If you are a working family, you just get screwed with new tax hikes and cuts to your health care. Already, the chaos and uncertainty these tariffs have created are pushing us into a Republican recession. But here is the thing you all need to know. Congress can actually reverse these tariffs. Last week, in fact, the Senate voted on a resolution to reverse Trump's tariffs on Canada by ending the bogus emergency declaration he used to justify them. That resolution passed the Senate with 4 Republican votes. But right now, it's dead in the water unless Speaker Johnson brings it up for a vote in the House. So what I'm calling on is our Republican colleagues to help us stop letting Trump tank the economy and raise prices. Vote with us to reverse these pointless and destructive tariffs. We could end this chaos today if Republicans would put their checkbook ahead of Trump's ego. So let's be clear. Any Republican who refuses to join us is joining Trump in raising prices on you and wrecking our economy. So I am delighted today to have 4 really great people who can lay out the basic facts for all of us and the cold, hard reality of tariffs and what they mean for people here in Washington State and to our economy. So let me turn it over first to Director Wynn. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Senator Murray, and thank you so much for your leadership on this and so many issues that support Washingtonians. Look, trade policy might feel a bit distant to the average Washingtonian, but it is deeply, deeply personal for us. Trump's proposed reciprocal tariffs would raise U.S. tariffs, some up to 60% on goods from some of our key partners, Vietnam, India, Taiwan, South Korea. These are some of the most important trade partners that we have, and those impacts will ripple throughout our economy, and they already have, and they will do it very quickly as well. Like Senator Murray said, over 40% of jobs in Washington State are tied to international trade. These are livelihoods in aerospace, in agriculture, in retail, shipping, tech, you name it. This will be impacted by what's happening at the federal level. We export about $17 billion in aircrafts alone. Much of that to countries now facing potential tariffs. Frozen potatoes. I didn't actually know this until I became Director of Commerce. One of our most important industries that we have, $1.1 billion in terms of exports that we have in Washington State. Apples, some of our most prized goods in Washington State will be impacted as well. And not to mention our critical infrastructure in electronics, clothing, and households. And what most people don't know is even if you don't know that they're impacted by tariffs, 90% of prescription drugs filled in the U.S. are generics. Much of those ingredients are made in India and China. So new tariffs can also impact your medication, even if it's not something that you would normally associate with tariffs. So working families are already having a hard enough time navigating the rising costs because of these Trump tariffs. Their stock portfolios or 401ks are tanking because of these Trump tariffs as well. And they're trying to figure out what's happening next. These are disruptive. They disrupt people's lives. They disrupt their jobs. They disrupt industries like Boeing, our shipping terminals, our farmers, our tech companies. All of this is on the line. And I just want to be very clear about what's at stake. Affordability, stability, and opportunity in every corner of our state is being jeopardized. Washington is going to be one of the hardest hits because we're one of the most trade exposed. So unfortunately, what's going to happen is that you will see this on your monthly bills. These reckless tariffs are going to impact your daily lives. And we're going to do as best as we can to mitigate some of those impacts. But this is something that, we're all going to have to be bracing for. So thank you so much, Senator Murray, for your leadership and for your advocacy. We're here to partner with you as we figure out how do we deal with these reckless policies.
Thank you. And I think we'll turn it over to Lori.
Thank you very much, Senator Murray and Director Nguyen. Senator Murray, really appreciate your leadership on these issues. As we've been discussing, trade equals jobs in Washington state. And as we know, 40% of jobs in the state are tied to international trade. We are proud of our diversity of exports, everything from aerospace to agriculture, to clean tech, to forest products, to life sciences, marine, and the military. And Washington state also facilitates trade and exports around the country. More than 50% of all U.S. wheat travels through our Columbia River system. Washington state, we've historically been blessed with very high GDP growth, low unemployment, and we have the 10th largest economy in the U.S. And WICHIT, Washington Council on International Trade, we've been longtime advocates for smart trade policy. And we were supporters of the USMCA because we were deeply concerned. And so we're very deeply concerned about the impacts that these aggressive unilateral tariff actions will have here locally. And we also know from the last almost decade that tariff policy has already negatively impacted Washington state. The goals that tariffs have been set out have failed to achieve the goals that they were meant to do, while causing a lot of costs and many lost opportunities. Those tariff measures now what we're talking about from a tariff perspective now is nowhere close. It's huge compared to what we've seen in the past. And from a broad historical context, in 2015, Washington state exports approximately nearly $90 billion in goods. And this made us one of the top exporting states in the country. But after, like I said, nearly a decade of tariff policy, in 2023, a lot of our goods and services were down to about, a third of that, down to about $60 billion. So as we know, there are negative impacts of tariffs already. We've already seen that. And this huge magnification of tariffs is really detrimental. Washington state is a top producer of apples, blueberries, hops, pears, spearmint, and cherries, and they're all susceptible to retaliatory action due to our tariffs. For example, a 20% retaliatory tariff on Washington apples from India caused Washington state apple shipments to plummet down, 90-ish%. And growers lost hundreds of millions of dollars in exports and is still struggling to come back to that, even though the tariff was improved in 2023. So we know that there is a long history of the damage of tariffs, which in previous times were much lower than they are right now. We could claim that tariffs are all about just leveling the playing field, but the reality is that retaliatory tariffs incentivize international buyers to source goods from other countries, leading to a loss of market share for Washington state exporters and our key industries. The bottom line is that there's very real negative and very real impacts of the self-induced harm, including increasing costs on manufacturing. I think there is broad support for improving domestic manufacturing in Washington state and around the country. However, these tariffs are going to drive up the cost of key inputs from other countries that support our domestic manufacturing. And given our border relationship with Canada, we're inextricably linked to that market, for example. Now you have to pay very high tariffs on those inputs, and this will undercut the goal of incentivizing more domestic manufacturing, not to mention picking a fight with one of our closest neighbors and allies. As Senator Murray mentioned, the cost of food will rise, and the retaliatory tariffs on our egg market cannot be understated. I think it's also important to point out that there is a lack of transparency about how these tariff rates have come to be. The new tariff rates are based on secret calculations that have very little to do with any connection to actual foreign trade barriers. And they've been justified by a quote unquote national emergency that reflects a clear misunderstanding of how trade deficit works. For example, I have a huge, massive personal trade deficit with my local grocery store. I'm trying to feed 3 teenagers, but I'm also grateful because I sure can't grow the amount of food that I need, let alone cook everything my kids want to eat. Tariffs, are disregarding at the macro level U.S. commitments and agreements that we've made over the decades, including commitments made by this very administration. Last but not least, I think it's really important to point out that in this scenario, we're treating many of our allies and adversaries the same, and I don't think that's any way to treat our friends, let alone secure the help we need from them at times and that they need from us. I would also just point out that some of our top trading partners include Canada, Mexico, Japan, Korea, Germany, Taiwan, and China. And we have started a round of economic warfare that will be significant and negative for Washington state. I appreciate the work that Senator Murray is doing and her talk specifically about the reasserting the congressional role in trade policy that is overdue. It's an important bipartisan issue that will allow Congress to play its proper role in determining the policies that best meet our needs as a country and as a state. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you, Senator Murray, for inviting the Department of Agriculture to participate today. We really appreciate your leadership as well. And our agriculture industry, as you mentioned, is very dependent on trade. I manage our international marketing program, and what we do is we help Washington food, beverage, and agriculture businesses export their products. We also work on market access issues because there certainly are a lot of unfair trade practices around the world that are detrimental to U.S. agriculture. However, that said, the current tariff approach that is in place right now is creating a lot of uncertainty for agriculture exporters. And obviously, uncertainty and unpredictability is not a friend of trade. We need dependability, stability. Agriculture exporters depend on this, and our trade partners also depend on this. The situation right now, as we know, is really fluid. There is a lot of uncertainty going on. We're tracking day to day the impacts, the potential impacts, the back and forth. But we do know some real truths based on what happened in the past. And as Lori mentioned, we've been through this before. A few years ago, we did face a number of retaliatory tariffs from the past Trump administration. Some of those are still in effect. We do know that those retaliatory tariffs did raise prices on our agriculture products. They did make our products more expensive for consumers, and they did result in lost market share. As Lori mentioned, and an example that's commonly used for good reason is our lost market share in India for apples. India had become our top market, and it was decimated due to these additional retaliatory tariffs. And although those tariffs were removed in 2023, as Lori mentioned, our exports last year to India were only about 22% of what they had been before. Cherries are another example. China had become our top market for cherries. We were at about $100 million worth in 2017. And after the retaliatory tariffs and continuation of those tariffs, I will add, we are still down about 70% from where we were. And now, of course, the additional retaliatory tariffs from China, the 10% that were added on to our cherries, which were already high back in March, and now this additional 34%. They are going to be extremely uncompetitive in the marketplace. And again, even if it is a short-term situation, getting the market share back is going to be very, very difficult. And it's also important, I think, to remember not just the lost sales that are going to result, but it has taken a lot of time and effort and money from the agriculture industry and from businesses to develop these markets, educating consumers, developing supply chains, and creating relationships which will be lost. Because trade really is based on relationships and trust, dependability. And what's happening right now is we, the US, are going to be seen as not being a dependable trade partner, which will, again, have effects down the road. We are already seeing, talking to companies, that business deals that they have had just about to land have been canceled. Distribution deals have been lost because there is this uncertainty. No one really knows what's going to happen going forward. Even just the threat of retaliatory tariffs is enough to stop some of these new deals from going through. And another thing that we're concerned about that wasn't as much of a problem last time, maybe in China a bit, but is becoming more of an issue this time, is the anti-American consumer sentiment in some of these markets. For example, Canada, which is our top agriculture export market for Washington. There are very real anti-American, not just by Canada, but by anything but American sentiments out there right now, which we don't know how that's going to play out. We hope it will not be long-term, but of course, if it is, that's going to have very real long-term impacts for our exports. I'll stop there, but I do just want to acknowledge that certainly, again, exports are critical for Washington agriculture. The uncertainty around the tariffs, the retaliatory tariffs, the uncompetitive pricing, the lost market share that will result, and the damage to our trade partners' relationships is a very real concern for Washington agriculture exporters at this time. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Blas Alfaro. I am a partner of Fulcrum Coffee Roasters in Seattle, Washington. At Fulcrum, we proudly serve over 400 cafes across the Pacific Northwest and work with others through the country. We are deeply embedded on the coffee community, not just as a coffee roaster, but a partner to the small businesses that define neighborhoods, towns, and cities across the region. I'm here today to speak on behalf of that community, the independent cafes, roasters, importers, and baristas who make up the human side of the coffee supply chains. Right now, our industry is facing extraordinary pressure. Green coffee prices have raised by up to 40% over the past year. This isn't just inflation, it is the result of our global challenges. Climate change, disruption of crops, labor shortage on producing countries, increased demand from growing economies, and declining output from some of the world's largest producers, including Vietnam and Indonesia. And now, with the April 2nd tariff implementation, that pressure is increasing. Here is what it looks like. A 10% base tariff on importing green coffee, a 46% tariff on coffee from Vietnam, which represent 20% of US importers, and 30% tariff in Indonesian coffee, a country known for unique flavor profile that simply cannot be substituted. This affects not just roasters, but also dozens of local independent cafes that we serve. Many of them drive-through espresso stands and family-run shops in small towns. Those businesses employ baristas and support staff, serve as a cultural and social gathering spaces, actively reinvest in their communities, but their margins are thin. Tariffs like those force them to make tough decisions, raise prices, reduce hours, or close altogether. The impact goes beyond the beans. Espresso machines, mostly manufactured in Italy, now face 30% tariffs. Packaging material, cups, bags, lids are also affected. The full cost of doing business is rising rapidly, and small operators are being hit the hardest. Our coffee community isn't asking for a special treatment. We are asking for a fair consideration, for recognition that those tariffs don't just affect imports, they affect real people, local businesses, and the community economies. Thank you, Senator Patty Murray, for the opportunity to speak today. Your leadership and your willingness to listen to our concern means a great deal to those of us working to keep this industry strong, local, and resilient.
Great. Thanks everyone for joining the call today. We now have some time for questions from reporters. I'm going to give folks a second. If you would like to ask a question, if you could use the raise hand feature to raise your hand, we'll go ahead and call on folks. And I'm going to give folks a minute to find it. All right, sorry for the delay there, just a little technical issue on our end, but it looks like we are ready to go to Philip with KHQ.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with each of you today. My question is for Ryan. Ryan, I've got a twofold question for you. My first question is what does the outlook look like right now regarding fertilizers and being able to produce those domestically for local agriculture? I know that a lot of that was being imported, and we had disruption that started with the Ukraine war, and that's only continued. And my second question coming out of this is we spoke with a local farmer last week who actually sees the tariffs as a benefit because with the higher prices at the grocery stores, they're actually seeing more people interested in buying local directly from them. So can you comment on each of those for us, please?
Sure. So I will say for your first question around U.S. production of fertilizer, I am not the subject matter expert on this topic. I do know it has not been feasible in the past. I do know it is being looked at. I really do not know what the feasibility of that potentially happening in the future. I do know that the majority of, for example, the potash that we are importing and needing is coming from Canada, I believe Saskatchewan in particular. But I apologize, I just don't have the answer to that, but I can look into it if you'd like. The second question, you are correct, certainly. I can't speak for all agriculture. I am really trying to speak for exporters and the agriculture industry that is focused on exporting, which is concerned about the retaliatory tariffs. There are admittedly farmers who are supportive of tariffs on foreign goods coming into the country, which they see as a benefit for competing domestically with our product.
Thank you.
Now we'll go to Joshua with KUOW.
Hi, thank you for taking the time to do this today. This is a question perhaps for Joe, perhaps for Senator Murray. I'm wondering, even Tesla was described as like an assembler of parts from around the world. I'm wondering in Washington manufacturing, how many what percentage of the manufacturers here are sort of taking other parts that they then import and assemble here? It seems like a large percent, but I don't really have a sense of that. I'm wondering if you can sort of lay out how big that is and how many are just making things that are entirely from, domestic sources. Thank you.
Washington's manufacturing industry is pretty robust. We have over, I think, 7,000 manufacturers, and there's about, 256,000 or so individuals who work in those places. And in general, just the nature of the supply chain, you do have things that are all over the world at any given time. And the fact that even Elon Musk thinks that this is a bad idea is kind of telling around kind of how the administration is handling some of these things as well. But even if you look at a piece of fruit or an apple that comes from Washington State, even the trucks that are required to, say, for instance, work in the fields, even the fertilizer, as we've mentioned, are impacted by tariffs. Even when they, use components to store them in a refrigeration unit, those oftentimes will have parts that are often from outside of the United States as well. Even the labels are sometimes out of the United States, right? So even goods that are made here domestically that you would think are just Washington State, the whole supply chain, in order to enable them, are going to be impacted. So again, about 40% of the jobs in Washington State are impacted by international trade. We expect likely, all, if not all, of the manufacturing to be impacted by this as well. But in terms of the specific numbers, we can get back to you as well.
Thank you.
And now we'll go to Mai with Cascade PBS. And you may need to mute.
I'm sorry. Thank you. I have a question for Rianne from agriculture. Can you talk about kind of the challenges of rebuilding a relationship, a trade relationship? You mentioned India specifically, and the tariff just lifted in 2023, it's 2025, so it hasn't been that much time. We're talking like years of a relationship. So I was wondering if you can kind of elaborate about having that process of having to rebuild relationships after something like a tariff, really decimates a market and access for such a long period of time.
Sure. One of the big challenges to something like this, and India is a perfect example, is that the market moves on. So they have to find replacement. They have to find other suppliers, and they do that. So the world has continued on. Unfortunately for us, some of the markets, this isn't necessarily for apples, but for other products as well, China, India, Turkey, there are certain countries that are really ramping up their agricultural production. They're becoming better at quality and volume, and they're able to compete with us at a different scale than they even were in the past. And so some of these other markets, some of these competitors have come in. Europe is another competitor of ours in many markets, Australia, where maybe they haven't had the tariff differentials that we did during those times. And they have taken that market share. They have built those relationships. And so now that, things have changed and maybe we're on a little bit of a more equal footing, although maybe not quite equal, it's very difficult to get that back. Though things have moved on, supply chains have changed. There's just a lot that goes into exporting and these relationships. And again, so what has helped is that there were some of these relationships in place from previous times, and so those have continued. One of the things that we are always continuing to try to do, even during these difficult times, is to maintain relationships, let these trading partners know how important they are to us, continue to be there, be present, and really hope that when things settle down, that these relationships have helped and will carry things through. But sometimes it's just not feasible economically.
May I ask another question? Okay. This question is actually for Lori. You talked about the concerns about the formula that they use to calculate the tariffs, and specifically about trade imbalances. And so, can you speak to kind of the misunderstanding that Trump is creating regarding what the trade imbalances are, and how that's creating a lot of confusion about, the relationships, which is why we're having these tariffs with, like, as you said, these, partners that we've had good relationships with.
Yeah, I mean, I think well, a couple of things. I just wanted to go back to a comment that or question that Phil was asking. 90 about well, maybe we could support some of these tariffs. I think it's just really important to remember that 95% of the world market is outside of the U.S., or we are a small fraction of the buyers. But in terms of some of the retaliatory tariffs and other things, to your question and the trade imbalances, is that a lot of these countries have come and said, hey, we will reduce our tariffs, we're going to zero them out, whatever, but we still may have an imbalance with those countries, right? We still may buy more, they may still, buy more from us, or we'll buy more from them, even if there are a zero tariff situation. So I just think it's a really, it's not a sophisticated way to look at how they are getting at these tariff rates that are going to come back and retaliate against us. So I think there's a lot more nuance in trade than these current rates are considering. And it's also not factoring in the fact that countries they can come to the US to buy things, or they can go to other markets around the world to buy things. If we're only two countries locked into a system, maybe you could make an argument that some of these tariffs might be effective levers to balance out and level trading playing fields. But because countries can buy from all over the world, the US isn't the only operator or the only seller, it makes it much more difficult. So I think given the calculations that the administration has used to arrive at these rates, and the deficits and the sophisticated nature of how some of these deficits are handled, it's not a smart way. On top of that, the U.S. has a trade surplus on digital trade and services, and that's not factored into this. Like because of our high tech sector and that sort of the things that we are able to develop and produce on that scale, it's not factored in either. So I just think that looking at it as sort of like a 1-for-1 or a 2-for-2 is just not the way that we're going to get to trying to level the playing field on any of these trade related issues. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
And now we'll go to Bradley Ward with KHQ.
Hi guys, a couple of questions. I'll start on the trade front, and this can be to everyone, and then I have one specific for the senator. I know there's been some pretty significant work done in opening free trade agreements with India to get our pulse crops and apples sold in that market. What concern does everyone have on the damage that this potentially could have with the Washington economy directly? And then in turn to the senator, wondering what work is being done right now in preventing Boeing from pulling positions, jobs out into other economies that they've started exploring, like Mexico. Just on the aerospace front, what are we doing to protect those positions in relation to the president saying that the way to advance our economy is to bring engineering and these jobs back to America? Wondering what is being done to protect the loss of them if, in fact, the president's idea here when it comes to tariffs aren't successful.
Joe, you want to take the first one? I'll take the second one.
Yeah, no, I think it's hard to explain in the sense of this is such a complex process in which we are trying to navigate, where having this uncertainty makes it very difficult for us, even in Washington State, to be able to address kind of all the difficulties that we're facing right now. I was actually just thinking through Lori's comments around where we have surpluses, and that's absolutely right, where the tariffs that are associated with that as well are not necessarily being mindful of those. We in Washington State are trying to go back to our partners. In fact, I've met with most of our major partners around kind of maintaining that relationship in Washington, seeing how we can potentially navigate in a system where the feds might not be associated with us as well. But that's kind of where we are.
Yeah, I would answer your question this way. I think you've heard just from this conversation how complex this all is, how this all interacts globally with multiple different countries, with people who we sell to and people who we buy from. It is extremely chaotic to have these tariffs put in place like this that is going to have an impact that we don't know down the road. But I can tell you, your question specifically was about Boeing. But if you are a major manufacturer, Trump is saying, well, we will now have all this manufactured at home. If you are a major manufacturer like Boeing or anybody else, you're going to say, do I want the chaos of trying to build this in America? or do I want to build it somewhere else? So we are putting that in jeopardy.
Thank you, Senator.
And for our next question, we'll go back to Joshua with KU.
Hi there. We're wondering if you can help clarify what are some of the non-tariff barriers to trading that relate to our state. These are often mentioned by the president as, worse than tariffs.
Who has to take that?
Yeah,
I think you could. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, Ryan, you can go first. I saw your hand was up.
Okay. I'll just go first to talk about agriculture a little bit. We do have a lot of non-tariff barriers to trade regarding agriculture. So there are a lot of issues between countries looking at, say, pests and diseases, for example. So countries may not allow some of our product in, saying that they're at risk for bringing pests and diseases that they do not want into their country. However, there may be very scientific protocols in place that are very clear and are working everywhere else. They may also be allowing these same products in with the same pest and disease concerns, following the same protocols that we are proposing, but countries are not allowing our product in. And there are a lot of these types of things that are happening that do not seem to be based on science. They seem to be based on protecting their own agriculture industry. So that's just one example. There are others around crop protection tools, just things like that, of that nature, that are seen as not really legitimate concerns because they are not given the opportunities necessarily to try to disprove them.
Are there specific examples, for perhaps a potato blight or something like that, that China is trying to keep out or something?
There are a number. There are a number of them. I don't have off the top of my head the specifics, but I'd be happy to follow up with some of those examples for you if you'd like.
Thank you.
And I mean, certainly we have standards in Washington State that we're proud of, whether it's on the climate or environmental side, where we are doing things on purpose to protect our air and our water. And sometimes that may conflict with, say, for instance, goods that might come in or be exported out from here as well. Certainly we'll have, as mentioned by Ryan, agricultural export compliance considerations just to make sure that we don't have disease or pest control associated with that. And then also we have fantastic infrastructure within our ports as well, but they certainly can be bottlenecks. And there's also policies in place at the federal level that impacts the cost associated with things as they come through Washington State. So there are a number of things like that. And right now, probably one of the biggest things when it comes with, say, for instance, foreign investments or companies in Washington State is energy. We've been very fortunate to have clean energy for a long time. Obviously, there's more demand that we have supply for now. And that's probably one of the biggest barriers is that how do we have more energy for some of these investments and goods coming into Washington State?
All right, I am not seeing any other hands raised. We have time for one more quick question. If anyone has one or was not able to figure out the raise hand function, you can go ahead and unmute. And not hearing anyone, I'm going to, I'll go to Philip for last question.
Yeah, I apologize. During the course of our call, just a reaction to the market today. We started up in the green pretty strong, and we've lost about 500 points since the start of this call. Still in plus territory on the Dow Jones. So, again, to the market volatility, if you could just speak to that, please.
And
Markets
the
like
question
certainty.
is?
Yeah. Markets like certainty. This is an uncertain time.
Yeah, chaos and uncertainty is not good for the products we grow or make in Washington State. It's certainly not helping us in our homes as prices are going to go up to have to deal with all this. So it is really disconcerting. I think the overall message again is this kind of chaos, this kind of just, we're just going to, huge tariffs to everybody coming in, retaliatory efforts is going to impact everybody, including our own families and small businesses and everyone's bottom line. It's going to cost more.
Thanks.
Thank you all very much. I really appreciate everybody participating in this. A lot more to come. Thank you.
Thank you.